welcome. Thank you for joining us today, actually the day before International Women's Day, but for this event celebrating and marking it. My name is Greg Leurs. I'm a librarian here at Royal Holloway. If you've attended any of our talks before, then you may have already met me, but if not, nice to meet you now. And my co-presenter today is Peggy Ainsworth, who I'm going to pass over to introduce herself very quickly.
Yep, hi, my name is Peggy Ainsworth and I'm the Art Collection Officer at Royal Holloway, so I look after the picture gallery.
Okay, so in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, then obviously we're celebrating International Women's Day, which is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, scientific and political achievements of women. With Bedford College and Royal Holloway obviously being, well, Bedford College being the first and Royal Holloway one of the first women's higher education institutes, they've been at the forefront and are pioneers in terms of supporting and helping women break into new job roles, careers, areas of society. And so they've really been at the kind of forefront, not just of the kind of move towards gender equality in education in the UK, but the impacting as well into different sectors and job roles. Consequently, because of this, a lot of Royal Holloway and Bedford College alumni have basically then gone on to live some extraordinary lives and impacted a whole range of different areas in the arts, in medicine, in sciences, in a whole range of humanities subjects as well, in really big ways. Now, obviously, we've not got a chance to explore all of these different people. So what we've done today is picked out a few of them in particular and actually tried to really highlight some of their achievements, what has made them pioneering in different areas. What is it that they've contributed? So there may be some people that you're familiar with already, or hopefully there's some new ones that you've never actually heard of before or know too much about. There'll be a lot more to discover about them that we don't cover in the talks. And obviously, there's a lot of people as well that you may know about that we're not going to have a chance to talk about today. But hopefully what we can do is really showcase some of the great work that some of the people we're going to be talking today have contributed and done and how they really are pioneers. Just to set up a little bit of background context then, just to kind of help frame all of this so we know the situation that a lot of these kind of people are living in and working around then, is really looking at the starting point from when Bedford College comes in 1849, the kind of context of what society is like at this point. There really is at this point, it's quite limited, the kind of opportunities that are available for women. And this is heavily influenced by, first of all, what money their family has and also their social standing. Working class women may have had a very, very limited education, if anything at all, and would have largely been confined to increasing factory work, domestic service as well, maybe some sort of child caring role, or actually for a lot of instances may have just been homemakers as well. In 1840, just to give you an idea of a few things, this is a few years before Bedford College even opens, around 60% of women at this point are illiterate. This is changing by 1860. This has dropped to around 40%. This gives you an idea of the kind of the state of education and the type of women that might be getting into it, because for middle class women, and these are the type of women that are mostly going to Bedford College and Royal Holloway, the opportunities are a little bit different in the job roles that they go into as well. There's a prevailing theory that things like the sciences, classics and certain other subjects are masculine. They're not for women. They're not taught to girls. And Bedford College and Royal Holloway are really ones that start offering these opportunities as well. They really buck the trend. Certain things where I won't do too many spoilers ahead, but how art is taught as well to women is something that really does start to change. Up until 1857 and the Matrimonial Causes Act, women couldn't petition for divorce. And again, even up until 1882, then if they did petition for divorce, it wasn't until the Married Women's Property Act of 1882 that they would actually retain any property, shares, income, work that they've created in their own right. Otherwise, it would have all just deferred to the husband. And so we've got this whole kind of arena that there is this process of change. There is this change in education. There is this change in legislation. You've got the growth of the suffrage movements and the women's rights movements. And it's into this arena then in 1849 and later Royal Holloway in 1886 that these colleges step and their alumna start to pioneer these new pathways for women.
So we're going to start today by looking at 3 alumnae who developed successful careers as artists alongside their work in a variety of other fields. So to start with, I'm just going to expand a bit on the context of women in the Victorian art world. So women have always been popular subjects of art, and the themes of these paintings can provide an insight into the roles and the rights of women throughout history. So on the screen are 3 paintings of women that are currently shown in the Royal Holloway Picture Gallery as part of the Thomas Holloway collection. So the first one, we've got the Babylonian marriage market, and this shows women being sold as wives in an imagined scene in ancient Babylon, and it shows the women as the property of men. The second picture, Expectation, shows the Victorian nostalgia for a sort of simpler and more rural life with women at the heart of the home. And here we also see a young girl in training for her future domestic duties, helping her mother look after the baby. In the third picture, the banker's private room, it shows a woman as a seductress trying to beguile the banker into negotiate a deal. And these are all male artists' depiction of women in the Victorian era. And actually, there's only one painting by a female artist currently hung in the picture gallery. So this made me wonder about women artists, and particularly individuals who'd studied at Bedford and Royal Holloway for their education. So, apologies for that one. So women artists were often middle to upper class. They had to compete in a male-dominated art world, and so they continued to paint popular themes of the time in order for their art to be commercially viable. Women's art groups started to develop, such as the Society for Female Artists in 1855, which gave women a space to exhibit their works and progress their art skills, but it still kept their work separate from their male counterparts, and men artists tended to join societies such as the Royal Academy of Arts. In 1857, an issue of the Examiner newspaper commented that it would actually be prejudiced to allow women into the Royal Academy of Arts because the society was set up for men in the first place, so women didn't really have a place there. And these attitudes continued throughout the Victorian era. So in 1871, the same newspaper commented saying that a women's society was actually contributing to the inequality of the sexes. So women couldn't join the Royal Academy, but also shouldn't be allowed a women's society. Thanks to the pioneering work of several women, including many of our alumnae, women were able to attend higher education facilities in the mid-1800s to study a variety of subjects, including art. And 2 of these institutions are our very own Bedford College and Royal Holloway College. And Bedford College actually had the first art school in England that allowed women to take part in life drawing. So it was at the forefront of that pioneering arts education. So the first alumna I'm going to talk about is Barbara Bodichon. Barbara was born in 1827 in Watlington, Sussex, to Benjamin Lee Smith, who was a member of the landed gentry known for his radical politics, and Anne Longden, who was a local milliner. Barbara's childhood saw the family travel to America, but when her mother was taken ill, they returned back to the UK, and Barbara's mother sadly passed away when she was about 7 years old. Barbara grew up in a household surrounded by politics and what were seen to be extremely radical views in Victorian England. Her father never married her mother, so they were already kind of ostracised as a family. And when Barbara and her siblings turned 21, their father gave them each an equal amount of money to invest in their futures. And so Barbara became financially independent and wouldn't have to marry to continue her lifestyle. Her father continued to be heavily involved in politics as an MP and then a magistrate, so that gave rise to many different opportunities for Barbara to network with these well-connected politicians. And she really aligned herself with these radical views of her father and sought to use her wealth to benefit those less fortunate than herself. As a young woman, Barbara met Bessie Rayner Parkes, who had grown up in a household with very similar political views, and the women became friends, even travelling without a companion throughout Europe in 1850, which was almost unheard of at the time. And the friends encouraged each other's exploration of politics and began writing information pamphlets on women's rights. Although initially Barbara was not able to attend university, as no colleges would admit women, when Bedford Square Ladies' College opened in 1849, she jumped at the chance to study art, and she made a name for herself with her studies of landscapes and flowers in the pre-Raphaelite style. And we can see one of the examples here in the study of sunflowers. Barbara's career in art progressed rapidly, and she became a member of the Society of Female Artists, earning praise for her artworks. The Athenian newspaper at the time commented on a painting that Barbara was exhibiting at the Society, saying it was a grand massing of ancient trees in twilight, one of the most impressive pictures this lady has produced, a bolder effort than is usual with one of the few English ladies who are artists by nature. Many of her paintings were inspired by her travels to Algeria, where she met her husband, the French physician Eugène, with whom she shared her progressive views on marriage. And indeed, Barbara would often travel back to England without her husband to attend political meetings and exhibit artworks. Following her involvement with the Society of Female Artists, Barbara petitioned for the Royal Academy of Arts to admit women in 1859. And although gradually the Society did begin to exhibit works by women artists, the first woman wasn't admitted to the Royal Academy until the 1930s, so there was still quite a long way to go. Alongside her career in art, Barbara continued to be instrumental in politics and shaping a new future for the rights of women. So as well as studying art at Bedford, she also studied political law, and her connections in the art world allowed her to make friends with lots of print workers, and she could print a lot of her writing about women's rights in the form of information pamphlets and journals. In 1854, after working alongside Bessie Rayner Parkes, Barbara published a brief summary in plain language of the most important laws concerning women, which contained detailed insights into the restrictions that women lived under in Victorian England, and it listed specific laws that enabled those restrictions to occur. And so Barbara's publication fed into the suffrage movement, which had already begun through the work of trailblazing women such as Anne Knight. And whilst the suffrage movement was largely concerned with giving women the vote, Barbara's cause was with the marriage laws that forced women to give up all of their property to their husbands upon marriage. Following a petition with over 26,000 signatures being rejected at the House of Lords, Barbara and her group did not give up on their campaigning, and eventually much further down the line, the Married Women's Property Acts were eventually passed in 1870 and 1882, giving women their property back after marriage. In 1857, Barbara published a new information leaflet called Women and Work, which argued that middle-class women should be able to take on paid work without disgracing themselves socially. And she continued to advocate for the work of other women, such as Elizabeth Blackwell, who she helped by organising venues for her medical lectures. In 1857, Barbara and Bessie established the Langham Place Group, which included many more influential women, most of whom were writers or politically active. And in 1859, they moved to a new premises in Langham Place, which is where the group name comes from, where they could meet regularly, share political ideas, and also pass on education and training to the next generation of women. Whilst with the Langham Place group, Barbara co-founded the English Women's Journal in 1858, which allowed her a nationwide platform to share her ideas. And she had to hold the shares of this company through her sister Anne, as it was still not permitted for married women to hold shares, and she married Eugène by this point. Following ceaseless campaigning for women's education and the failure of some of her petitions to Parliament, Barbara and her colleague Emily Davies, who was also in the Langham Place group, put funding towards the establishment of a women's college at Cambridge, and Girton College was established in 1869 and formally accepted as part of Cambridge University in 1948. In her later years, Barbara continued to support women's education through the funding of individual women's education and careers, and donating property and money to the education of the less fortunate. And her work really enabled the education of countless women and helped establish the careers of other alumnae in the college. And one of these alumnae was Kate Peregrine, née Dickens, photographed here with her father Charles and her sister Mary. So Kate Peregrine was born in 1839 to the novelist Charles Dickens and his wife Catherine, and she was the youngest surviving daughter of 10 children. She spent her childhood travelling around, mostly in France and Italy, and whilst her brothers were educated in prestigious schools around Europe, Kate and her sisters were educated by tutors and governesses in their homes. When she was quite young, it was noticed that she had a really good talent for art. And as Charles Dickens was such an influential novelist and a man about society, he was friends with a lot of influential people. And one of these people was Elizabeth Jesser Reed, who founded Bedford College. So he was able to arrange for Kate to go and study at Bedford College at around the age of 12 or 13, so very young age. Kate studied at the college for about a year before being taken to Paris, where she saw her father's portrait being painted, and this really sparked off her career as a pre-Raphaelite portrait painter. And we can see an example of one of her portraits here, and this is a portrait of her niece. As a member of a wealthy family, Kate was encouraged to marry quite young. So at the age of 21, she married Charles Collins, who was the brother of the author Wilkie Collins, who was friends with her father, Charles Dickens. They struggled financially during their marriage, and despite Charles Collins being an artist, their work didn't really overlap that much. Kate was widowed in 1873 and secretly married the artist Charles Perugini in the same year. So Charles Perugini and Kate's marriage saw them both working together as artists, encouraging each other's work and collaborating on pieces together. Due to her lifelong involvement in the art world, Kate had very many influential artist friends, such as John Everett Millais, and that was a style she very much admired and which influenced her own work. Kate frequently exhibited with the Society of Female Artists, and her work was featured in a Royal Academy show in 1877. And these exhibitions paved the way for a monumental showcase in Chicago in 1893, where Kate exhibited 9 of her works at the World's Columbian Exposition. And ever gaining momentum, when she returned to the UK, she went on to exhibit 34 of her paintings at the Royal Academy in 1904. And despite all her success, Kate still applied her artistic talent to other projects, and she frequently illustrated her father's and siblings' publications, such as the Charles Dickens birthday book made by her sister, which we can see her illustration on the screen now. Kate was part of this emerging world for women to exhibit their artistic talent, made possible by the advocacy of women such as Barbara. And although her wealth and father's influence may have opened doors for her, she made a name for herself in her own right, and she worked alongside her husband to develop her career. The third alumna we're looking at who benefited from Barbara's work and advocacy was Dorothy Richmond, known as Dollar to her friends. Dorothy was born in 1861 in Auckland, New Zealand. Her father, James Crowe Richmond, was an eminent watercolour artist who mainly focused on New Zealand landscapes, and he was also an MP. So Dorothy grew up watching her father paint. Following the death of her mother in 1865, Dorothy moved around a lot as a child and was taken to Europe to undertake drawing lessons after she'd shown an interest in her father's watercolour works. So she studied at Bedford College and then the Slade, working under the French artist Alphonse Legros, who encouraged work under a variety of media. And by 1880, Dorothy's work had earned her a scholarship at the Slade, and she continued to study there until 1881, when she returned to New Zealand to take up a post as art mistress at Nelson College for Girls. Dorothy used her experience to teach the ladies of the college about art, passing on the knowledge she'd learnt from her travels and from her father. In 1890, she became a member of the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts, and later in 1896, she studied with James Nairn, who was at the forefront of shaping art in New Zealand. Following her employment at the college, Dorothy was able to break the mould and achieve financial independence for herself, which meant that she could quit her job and travel. In 1901, Dorothy met Francis Hodgkins, who was another landscape painter from New Zealand. Francis and Dorothy became fast companions and travelled around Europe together, from Paris to Italy to Tangier to London, supporting each other's art careers and attending art classes and exhibiting their works together. Around 1904, Francis and Dorothy established a studio together in New Zealand, but they became distant in 1906 following Dorothy's rekindled relationship with Constance Astley, of whom Francis was jealous. And Francis actually wrote to Dorothy in 1903 saying, "I know you would rather nurse one of her empty envelopes than read the outpourings of my innermost soul. However, I mustn't expect too much." Despite this distancing, Francis and Dorothy continued to be friends, and Dorothy went on to teach art at the Samuel Marsden Collegiate School for Girls and establish a new studio in New Zealand, eventually being honoured with a life membership of the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts in 1928. Dorothy and Kate's stories showed the achievement of the work of people like Barbara Bodichon and other women who were campaigning for equality throughout their lifetimes. And the fact that women can study art, exhibit their work and attend university today is thanks to these pioneering women who shaped the future of education, and thanks to the work of women's colleges such as Bedford and Royal Holloway, making education accessible to all. And we continue to educate through art at Royal Holloway today through our picture gallery opening hours, private art store tours, research assistance and supporting students in exploring ways into the heritage sector.
All right, I'm going to come in now then, because I'm going to be talking about Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, where if you're listening closely, did actually get a little bit of a name drop earlier on when talking about Barbara Bodichon. And actually Barbara Bodichon as well is a name that's going to crop up in a few other areas as well. Now, as I'm going to go through these parts then, what I actually want to kind of get you to be thinking about as I go through them is actually how much some of these lives of these different women start to overlap and intertwine, because of how much of they do have, yes, their own independent successes, but how much the work of other people as well, like in the spheres around them, really do link together, and how there is this kind of patchwork or overlapping, interweaving stories of all these people that go on to really help each other directly or indirectly with their own then pioneering achievements. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, without saying too much about her particular achievements first, I kind of want to set the context of her background, because I think it really does add some importance to understanding really how remarkable her achievements were for the time. Now, she's born in 1821 in Bristol and moves to the US aged 11. Her parents are very, very liberal, in that sense, something very similar to Barbara Bodichon, that growing up, the parents believed that each child in the family, she's one of 4 sisters, should have equal opportunity, regardless of gender, to explore and develop their own talents and knowledge. So even though actually they weren't from a wealthy background, her father was actually involved in sugar processing, but the family was staunchly on the side of abolition and against slavery. And so really in that sense, because of working in America, did have some financial repercussions that he wouldn't work with any plantations that owned slaves. Growing up then, there's a lot of discussion in the household around the abolition movement, around child labour, women's rights, suffrage, and this whole kind of idea, this discussion, this hodgepodge of all kind of things coming to the forefront, that their whole kind of formal introduction, this whole education they're coming up with, is that there should be this equality, this parity between genders. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, she recounts growing up that what money they did have was put towards their education. But it is worth noting that this isn't like a family that's connected to society. This isn't kind of new world money in America who are making huge sums of money and having influence. This is a lower middle class family at best, who've obviously got some ideas and very kind of forefront ideas at this time around women's education and the rights of women. Now, Elizabeth's father dies age 17, and simply because of financial circumstances, she's forced to then find a job, and her and her sisters actually go into teaching. They set up a school and they start actually then running a school and making money that way, taking on students. Because of some kind of religious differences with local communities, and also as well some of the areas that they did work, having to actually see slavery for the first time up front and close, they quit from teaching and went into private tutoring instead. And it's at this point then, like, Elizabeth's at a little bit of a crossroads in her life, because she enjoys teaching to an extent, but she doesn't feel that it's her calling. She feels that there's something more she wants to do. She feels she's not necessarily kind of achieving something new or pushing agendas in her own right. She has a friend then who is unfortunately terminally ill. And in a conversation with her, her friend remarks that she feels her healthcare would have been more sympathetic and would have been more effective if it had been provided by a female doctor. Now, at this point, there are no female doctors in the US or even the UK at this point. And even though actually from her own admission in her biography, she says that she's very uncomfortable with blood and workings of the anatomy. She says, "The horrors and disgusts I have no doubt of vanquishing. I have overcome stronger distaste than any that now remain and feel fully equal to the contest." She now decides that she is going to become a doctor. So for all of the context we talked about before, no one has done it. No woman has done this before. She's not got societal connections. She's not got money to have influence. She's going to have to do it through pure sheer force of will. Now, Yes, this conversation kind of sparks it in her, but actually what this does is spark something else with all around equality and women's rights. And there's the quote here that from her, again, from a biography that she wrote, that the idea of winning a doctor's degree gradually assumed the aspect of a great moral struggle, and the moral fight possessed immense attraction for me. She wanted to do this, yes, for the one side of it, for the healthcare, but also because she felt it was the right thing to do in terms of breaking down these barriers and building in this equality for women. So what she did then, she saved up some money, what it would cost for her tuition fees, and she started applying to medical schools across the Philadelphia and New York areas. She applies to 12 medical schools who all then reject her, until ultimately Geneva College accepts her application. And there's an interesting kind of story around this as well, because the reason that they accept their application is they actually check their bylaws, and nowhere explicitly in there does it doesn't bar women from joining up at the medical college. The dean of the college is, well, OK, the rules don't prohibit it, so he's got no problem with it, but they put it to the vote of the student body. And so 150 students then in 1847 actually unanimously vote to accept her into the college to begin her medical training. Now, there's some real mixed reports on kind of how this happened. Newspaper reports and what we can find from correspondence at the time suggests that actually they voted unanimously for it to happen. That's on record. And actually then they all signed up to a code of conduct basically saying that they would treat her as an equal within the classroom and throughout their education. And from what her own reports are, that seems to be borne out quite true, even though there was some hostility in the local community. There's another story, though, however, that says that actually the 150 students kind of voted it in as a bit of a joke. Actually, they thought it would be a kind of a bit of a joke that we can let a woman in to study medicine. Whether it was a joke, then the actual joke is on them in the end, because 2 years later, when she graduates, she's top of the class and her thesis ends up being published in the Buffalo Medical Journal, all about her research that she had been doing. However, she's qualified now, but she hits a new barrier, and that barrier is of employment. And there's a very interesting context around that as how she's kind of viewed and treated, because this news is celebrated across the world. The first female doctor in the US, it's not happened in the UK either. The press is very positive about it. And in fact, even Punch magazine writes a verse about it, which I'll try my very best to recount as well, which says, "Young ladies all of every clime, especially of Britain, who wholly occupy your time, in novels or in knitting, whose highest skill is but to play, sing, dance, or French, or clack well, reflect on the example, pray, of excellent Miss Blackwell." Little bit of condescension in there, perhaps, but still celebratory. And this is the kind of nature that it's seen as this curiosity, this kind of anomaly, perhaps, to it. And she struggles to find any sort of employment. And so she starts looking further abroad. And this is where actually Bedford and the UK come into the story. Because this is one of the things I kind of want to say, like, yes, Bedford becomes part of the story, but the story is very much of her own making so far. She first of all starts off in 1849 in Paris, working at La Maternité, under the express agreement that she would actually be treated as a student midwife, not a physician. So again, we can see there's a certain disparity there, even though actually leading obstetrician at the time, Paul Dubois, says that she would actually make the best obstetrician in the United States, male or female. By 1857, she, despite moving around Europe a bit, she ends up moving to London. And this is where she attends Bedford College for years, where Bedford comes into the story. We're a little bit unclear exactly what she studied at this point. I've not seen her specific student record, unfortunately, in the archives yet, but it's likely that she studied a range of science-based topics. But what we do know, again, from private correspondence, that actually what she's doing at this time in Bedford College is actually pushing for sanitary science to be added into the curriculum. We know later on that public health and hygiene comes into the curriculum as well. And actually, we can see an archive photo on the top here, which is showing an experiment called Why Weak Hearts Fail, which was part of that course that was introduced and then introduced basically as a kind of backdoor way of introducing some basic medical kind of teaching and training without naming it explicitly. That, so if there's an influence we can see here, it's that she's come to Bedford, but she's actually exerting some influence on what is taught there to try and open the door further for other women to hopefully get into these professions. Now, one of the things that becomes interesting here is, and she got into Geneva College because of basically it wasn't explicitly said that women couldn't enroll at the college. And it's these kind of loopholes then that start having a big bearing on the future of herself and women in the medical professions, because in 1858 the Medical Act is passed, which recognises doctors with foreign degrees then being able to practice in Britain. At the insistence then of friends and other colleagues and things like that, she then signs the General Medical Council's medical register on the 1st of January 1859, becoming the first woman to do so in the UK. In typical fashion, the government very quickly closes this loophole, so you now have to be trained in the UK, because the UK bars all women from entering the medical profession. They don't teach it de facto. You can't train to be a doctor as a woman in the UK. You cannot then sign the medical register. You cannot practice. Now, several things happen at this point then. One of the things that she does is she starts then doing lecture tours, and she meets people such as Florence Nightingale and Elizabeth Garrett Anderson. Florence Nightingale, even though obviously the Crimean War happens, I think it's about 7 years after Dr Blackwell graduated from Geneva, 5 or 7 years, there's actually quite a lot of what Dr Blackwell was talking about with a lot of her work about bringing empathy and hygiene, this influence from her terminally ill friend, into healthcare, that you can perhaps see again with how Florence Nightingale is best well known for her work in the Crimean War. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson then is actually the first female surgeon in Britain. Through direct conversation with Blackwell, she's inspired then to try and enter into the healthcare profession. And the way she does this is she gets some training, she supervises on wards, she uses some of her own societal connections, and then again, using a loophole with the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, who didn't disbar women from sitting medical exams, she sits the medical exam and then passes and is able to add her name onto the medical register. Again, this loophole is very quickly closed. But this is where, again, the influence of Dr Blackwell comes in, and really this pioneering element of it as well, is because one of the things that she then does is become involved in the training of women, because there isn't anything like preventing them from actually giving medical training to women. Even though the established colleges won't accept women in, what they do then is they actually then start setting up schools to train women themselves. So going back from 1853 in America, Dr Blackwell opens up a dispensary that then grows into a practice which has over 7,000 patients a year. In 1874, she helped set up the London School of Medicine Women with Elizabeth Garrett Anderson and a whole number of others. And then by 1876, actually, the law changes again. The Medical Act of 1876 allows women to sign the medical register. And here's where it gets interesting again in terms of this impact and pioneering element, that how she's opened these doors for these people. She started bringing in new perspectives and attitudes towards healthcare, that by the end of the 1870s, you've got 476 women who are now on the medical register in the UK. And this is a direct impact of her work. So here's what we can kind of think, and what we can see is that she directly influences Elizabeth Garrett Anderson becoming the first female surgeon of Britain. And that does lead us into the next person we're going to talk about. She starts changing attitudes around the hygiene and cleanliness. And we can see that again with courses she's actually trying to bring in at Bedford and her approach to medicine. But really what this whole kind of takeaway here is that she is this person who's come from very humble origins, and through the sheer force and determination has decided, this is something I'm going to do. I'm going to break down these barriers, I'm going to open these doors. And she is there first then with, yes, this bit of association with Bedford, but through her own determination becomes this pioneering woman in medical healthcare. That leads us into then Louisa Garrett Anderson. And Louisa Garrett Anderson, you're going to recognise the surname, is the daughter of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first female surgeon in Britain. Now, Louisa Garrett Anderson, it's kind of like mother like daughter. She's going to follow in the same footsteps. And what she does then, she attends Bedford College. She then passes the London matriculation, which enables her to get into the London School of Medicine for Women, of which obviously her mother is involved in helping set up. Now, Louisa Garrett Anderson comes from a very interesting background with a number of family connections as well. Her mother was obviously good friends with Barbara Bodichon, a whole range of other people as well. Her aunt, so Louisa Garrett Anderson's aunt, is Millicent Garrett Fawcett, who was obviously the head of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. Her herself is actually a suffragette, so there's actually a bit of a division within the family here. But what she is determined to do, again, is to keep breaking down these barriers, breaking down these doors, and getting into healthcare, getting into medicine. For her specifically, she wants to follow in her mother's footsteps and be a surgeon. She ends up graduating from the London School of Medicine for Women in 1900 and spends a period of time basically travelling around Europe and America observing surgeries. Again, because of her gender, she's struggling to get actually any sort of meaningful employment. It's still a barrier at this point. And so what she actually does then is join the new hospital for women in 1902, which was a hospital set up by her mother. And so again, there's this kind of evidence, these loopholes working their way around it. If men won't let them into that arena, they will create them for themselves. And she's part of this. While working there, she starts off as a surgeon's assistant before being promoted to a senior surgeon. And one of the things that she's very conscious of doing with her work is getting it published, because that starts to change perceptions, change ideas about women in medicine, showing them and the talents that they've got. And so there's this work that she starts doing again to try and break down these barriers and open these doors. I'm going to mention Flora Murray very quickly at this point, because it's around this time then that she, through the suffragette activities, she meets Flora Murray, who becomes her life partner and follows her through with a lot of her achievements that do come at this point now. Because then it's in 1914 that the First World War breaks out, suffrage activities stop, and the world kind of changes now for Louisa. And this is really where she pioneers healthcare, well, women in healthcare in a military environment. A lot of this is based on a very excellent book, Endell Street, The Women Who Ran Britain's Trailblazing Military Hospital by Wendy Moore. If you do get a chance, please do check it out. It's a fantastic book that draws on some of the archives we've got here at Royal Holloway and Bedford New College. But basically what she does at this point, she basically just thinks the British War Office is not going to be interested in hiring women to help deliver any healthcare to wounded soldiers. So she approaches France and the French Red Cross, goes over there and sets up an auxiliary field hospital in Paris. This hospital is kind of initially viewed as just, again, this kind of curiosity, how novel, women running a hospital, and it attracts a lot of press attention and actually a lot of visits from a lot of the members of the British War Office. Sir Alfred Keogh becomes aware of it as well, who was the Director General of the Army Medical Services at the time. And what actually happens is that while some people do go there with the express idea of just actually ridiculing this hospital run by women, each one of them to a person comes away impressed at how efficient it is run, how well it is run. What happens then is a whole number of things very, very quickly. They're then invited to set up a new hospital at Vimreux in northern France. And there they start treating a lot of the soldiers coming off from the front lines from Passchendaele, Ypres and places like that. This now is the very first time that a hospital run by women has been officially recognised and incorporated into the British Army Medical Services. So this is a breakthrough, that while there were other hospitals at the time run by women, this is the first one officially recognised by it. And there's a very interesting kind of story that happens here as well. And there's a Punch cartoon you can hopefully see that at this point what happens is there's a very interesting encounter. One of the soldiers that ends up in their care with an injury turns actually out to be a police officer who had arrested Louisa Garrett Anderson at the Black Friday protests as part of the suffragette movement. And there's this, I suppose, from his perspective, a very awkward encounter of recognising this woman who he'd arrested for their protests and now on the receiving end of their health care. And there's this kind of cartoon here which actually presents Louisa Garrett Anderson and the female medical practitioners in a very positive light, that they are the esteemed female doctors. He's the kind of humbled, kind of slightly embarrassed person over all of this. And again, it's this whole thing around optics, how things are presented and how it is changing minds. What happens now then is in 1915, they're invited to run Endell Street Hospital in London. This now becomes known as the Suffragette Hospital, as in Louisa Garrett Anderson and Flora Murray, who she's still with and working with, decide that they are purely going to staff their hospital with women. Any medical roles in this hospital are by women as much as possible, one sympathetic to the cause of women's suffrage, and it becomes known as the Suffragette Hospital. They appeal out to all their friends, and so the hospital then gets a library. They have entertainment officers. They've got regular fresh flowers, colourful bedding. And really one of the quotes that comes from Anderson is they say that she wants the men to feel rested and refreshed in their spirits by staying here. So this kind of empathetic element, it isn't just about the physical ailments. There's a mental part of it as well, which echoes a lot of what Dr Blackwell had been saying before. There's one recorded instance of a poor gentleman who refused to be treated by women, so asked to be moved hospital. And the very next day, his mother came back to Endell Street Hospital begging and asking for him to be readmitted, because it was known then at that point as the best military hospital in London. Now, in terms of kind of wrapping up, well, what achievements from this? What is the pioneering element of this? Well, she's a pioneering war surgeon. This not just from the fact that it was very rare at this point for women to have treated men on terms of any scale or capacity, so there's that thing, but also the actual type of surgeries that were occurring around the trauma, the gas injuries and things like that. They were accepting 60 to 80 patients a day, performing up to 20 operations a day, and they treated, they reckoned during the period that they were open, around 26,000 patients, and Louisa Garrett Anderson was involved in about 7,000 surgeries in this time herself. They're part of a kind of pioneering technique that's actually still used to this day in some instances around certain antiseptics and dressings that reduced the use, changing of bandages by 80%, so made it a lot more effective, efficient and saved time. She's also massively involved in the pioneering use of x-rays to examine trauma for the extraction of any kind of foreign bodies from the body as well. And she's also at the hospital, they want to have people there to have dentists, pathologists, the use of x-rays, mental kind of support as well, as much as they can do. And so again, this kind of holistic approach to it. One of the kind of quotes that comes from this as well is from an Australian doctor, Vera Scantlebury as well, who comes over to work at Endell Street. Says, "I have the greatest admiration and respect for these two women. They have struggled against fearful odds and have succeeded beyond all expectations against the greatest prejudice." And this is one of the things as well, that from all of this, it changes hearts, it changes minds, it changes attitudes, that these people who were kind of ridiculed as being suffragettes are now pioneering this way, changing hearts and minds. And in 1917, they're actually then awarded the CBE, the Dame Commander of the British Empire, as the very first women to do so, because it was the first time this award had been given. And I think the kind of story in this sense, for all of their achievements, some of the horrors that they must have seen, there's a little story within this as well that if you've come to previous talks you'd have caught up on around Louisa Garrett Anderson and Flora Murray, that when they do actually have both passed away, on Flora Murray's headstone the families add the sentence, "We have been gloriously happy." And if there's any sort of legacy within that, as in being aware of the relationship that had, the potential scrutiny that it could have brought at the time, to achieved all of this as well, is truly remarkable. Dr. Kathleen Lonsdale, if you follow the library's Twitter account, you may have had a bit of a sneak peek into some of the great achievements of this woman. She's basically a scientific prodigy in this sense. And there's a number of interesting things around her application for Bedford College and a whole kind of educational route into it. She comes from quite humble backgrounds, being born in Ireland and then moving to London in 1911. She's the daughter of a postmaster. So again, not from wealth, not from societal connections. And what basically happens then is she's attending Ilford County High School for girls. They don't teach science and maths there, so again, a whole kind of interesting perspective on what subjects are still considered masculine and feminine, but she's clearly got a talent for it because she's then transferred to Ilford County High School for boys. And you can guess then almost certainly the only girl at that school, and then taking these subjects. She then actually at age 16, so a year earlier than normal, applies for Bedford College. And I can't say this is quite like having Charles Dickens societal connections to get you in. This is on her own kind of academic merit, not to kind of disparage the artistic talents of other people, but she ends up there age 16, coming in, and she has to have an interview with Principal Margaret Tuke at the time, Professor Hilton, who's head of the science departments at the time as well. And she is then accepted in on the recommendation from her high school, in spite of the fact that she will not reach the age of 17 until January 1920. Also as well, she passes the Cambridge senior examination, which enables her to be awarded a scholarship of £60 a year for the 3 years, so she can complete her studies. And she goes on then in 1922 to achieve a bachelor's in science in mathematics, and then went on to study an MSc in physics as well at University College London, graduating in 1924, top of her class. This now then brings her to the attention of a particular field of research around crystallography. And this is where she really does some of her pioneering work. She works with William Henry Bragg at the Royal Institution, and her whole area field of speciality is using her knowledge of X-rays, again a bit of a link back to Louisa Gower Anderson, her use of X-rays in a different context, but pioneering use of them to study the composition of different materials. Very interestingly, there's a letter in our archives that she writes to Margaret Tuke to tell her about her appointment to the Royal Institution to work with William Bragg, and actually spends most of the time comparing her physics labs back to the ones at Bedford College in terms of the differences, the different quality and things like that. Now, she's studying crystals, other materials through X-rays, and what she's trying to basically do is work out the composition of them, the structure of them as well. And this is where I'll admit a degree of ignorance about the certain scientific technicalities of this. But what she's actually able to do through these methods of using X-rays is to prove that the structure of benzene and hexachloral benzene, don't say that too many times, was actually flat and hexagonal. And this is something that had been theorized about before, but she's actually now able to prove this. What she then does, she actually, despite making this kind of groundbreaking discovery that's going to have a bit of an impact in a number of different areas, she actually then takes a break now to start a family, but still on the side, still starts investigating this whole idea of structure factors, which is again the structure of different compounds and things as well through her X-rays. And she's doing this work while obviously balancing a kind of home life at this point now. In 1949, once returning to work, she's actually then appointed Professor of Chemistry and the head of the Department of the Crystallography at the University College London. She is the first tenured woman professor at the college. And so again, breaking down these barriers, moving into sciences, but also into education as well, and becoming the first tenured woman professor. Now, there's a whole number of things that happen here that are worth mentioning around all of this as well, because one of the things around her, she is a Quaker and a pacifist as well. And in World War II, she refuses to join the Civil Defence Service. She's imprisoned at Holloway prison for a month and then joins the Howard League for Penal Reform. This is one of these things in terms of, yes, she's a scientist, but there's so much more around her that she's doing and contributing and working towards. Now, from all of this, then, from all of her life, there's a whole number of notable achievements that she then does go on to have. And she's kind of like one of many firsts. One of the most significant is she is the first of 2 women elected as a fellow to the Royal Society in 1945. She's one of the first of 2 women to do that, the other one being biochemist Marjorie Stevenson. She's also elected an honorary member of the Women's Engineering Society. She's made a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire 39 years after Louisa Gower Anderson was in the first cohort to receive that award. 1966, she's the first woman president of the International Union of Crystallography. 1967, she's the first woman president of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. And there are buildings now named in her honour at University College London, University of Limerick and Dublin City University as well. And there is a blue plaque on her childhood home in Ilford. More interestingly as well, there is actually a compound named after Lonsdale, which is basically a rarer, harder form of a diamond only found in meteorites. And so we can make an interesting kind of analogy here of she is a shooting star in that respect. And there's a very interesting quote that I think reflects a number of kind of themes and points here, that she's credited with this quote that one of her colleagues, Sir Lawrence Bragg, once described the life of a university professor as similar to that of a queen bee, nurtured, tended and cared for because she has only one function in life. Nothing could be farther from the life lived by the average professional woman. Make of that what you will in a current context. Dr. Rosalind Pitt-Rivers then, I got half an eye on time here, so apologies if I do rush through this a bit, but Rosalind Pitt-Rivers comes from a very interesting background in that you could call her the aristocratic scientist in one sense, that she comes from a position of status, not necessarily wealth in that she's certainly not poor, but within the kind of status in society or standing in society she's coming from, they are by no means wealthy. Her mother is Sylvia Laura Stanley, whose father was the third son of Anthony Henley, the third Baron of Henley, and her mother was the daughter of Lord Stanley of Alderley as well. So sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. Father's Henley, mother's Lord Stanley of Alderley. So they're coming from societal connections. There is some things there. And what's interesting is that previously for like aristocratic women, education wasn't necessarily seen as like a particular route that you would go down. It was more of a societal kind of thing. You'd be introduced to society rather than kind of education and work. But interestingly, at age 12, her uncle actually buys her a chemistry set. And this is what kind of sparks a real interest in science for her. A little bit of a novel then, she's actually then given a governess, and she actually attends then Notting Hill High School, which is not entirely unusual, but for someone from a social standing is a little bit of an anomaly, especially for the subjects that she's interested in. And she then really does, with a kind of determination, independence, pursue her interest in chemistry and science. Her sister wrote about her, talking about Rosalind, that everything not work was of relatively little importance. To her passion for work and her view of its importance, I partly attribute to the fact of her indifference to the fact of it being a man's world. The subject was what mattered, never mind the person. Whatever sphere she wanted to get into, that was her world. Let the others be who they may or think what they liked. From this then, she then joins Bedford College. In 1927, she studies a Bachelor of Science degree and graduates in 1930 with a first-class degree. A number of obituaries written about her recount that she was actually top of her class, but I'm unable to verify this, but I'd probably like to think that it's quite true. And she then goes on to study her master's, during which as well she has 2 articles published in the Journal of Chemical Society. At this point now, after graduation, she actually marries George Pitt-Rivers, who was one of the richest men in Britain at the time, grandson of Augustus Pitt-Rivers, founder of the Pitt-Rivers Museum in Oxford, if you are familiar with this. She then goes on to attain a PhD in 1939 at University College Hospital Medical School in London and starts working with Sir Charles Harrington at the National Institute for Medical Research. And this is where the real pioneering element comes in to force. Basically, her whole area of interest is around thyroids and hormones, and there's basically this compound that's been identified that no one quite knows what it is. They've discovered it in rats and then subsequently humans as well, and actually unbeknownst to them and the research team, the same discoveries have been made in Paris as well with sheep and then humans. And what happens now at this point is there is a research race kind of then happens as to who can discover what this compound is first. Through a series then of over a 6-month period, the 2 research teams competing published 5 different papers about their research, neither clearly identifying the compound until late in autumn 1951. Rosalind Pitt-Rivers makes a breakthrough, identifies it as the T3 hormone in the thyroid gland, and then there's a race for 6 months later to publish a couple of papers beating the team in France identifying this. So what's the significance of it? So basically now this enables the test to discover if you have an overactive or underactive thyroid and all of the relevant then medical implications that come with that. And this is the work, this is the discovery that comes from that goes on to get worldwide attention and leads then to a whole number again of awards and recognition for what she's done. She's then made a fellow of the Royal Society. So again, following on like Kathleen Lonsdale, who kind of broke into that area, she's following in those footsteps. But throughout her whole career, then she ends up with 114 publications to her name. She becomes a member of the Bedford College Council. She's a member of the Council for the Society of Endocrinology. She's president of the London Thyroid Club, European Thyroid Association, an honorary member of the Society for, honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine, and honorary fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. And again, there's this whole thing of she's breaking down these doors, she's getting these recognitions, she's making these inroads for women to get into these areas because of the work she did, because of the significance of it. Now, I've put at the end of this slide here, they've put the word divorce, and you may be thinking, well, what's that got to do with legacy or anything like that? And this is something where this whole story for me comes back, loops around, and as I was talking about this kind of interweaving of so many of these different women's stories. Just before the First World War, she actually divorces her husband, something that she initiates and enacts. Because of that, she's actually still able to retain all of her money, lands, assets, work, and everything that she's done because of the acts that came into force due to the advocacy and activism of Barbara Bodichon all those number of years ago. So going all the way back to Barbara Bodichon as one of the first, well, in the first intake of Bedford College in 1849, the work that she did with the activism around women's rights and the Marriage Acts comes to play now for Rosalind Pitt-Rivers when she divorces her husband and is able to then retain all of her property, assets, research and work. And so there's this whole kind of looping back around, this whole interweaving of these stories of indirectly and directly influencing each other that lead to these different things and outcomes. Now, each of these women lived incredibly remarkable lives with significant achievements to them. There's been a whole number of kind of knock-on repercussions too of how they've all interlinked and interwoven. And I kind of actually want to leave you then with a few statistics I've taken from the Office of National Statistics, just to kind of highlight a few things. As of 2020, 56% of higher education students are women. 55% of UK medical students are women. 45% of registered doctors are women. 35% of MPs are women. 30% of science researchers are women. The average gender pay gap for full-time employees is currently 7.9%. And only 8% of Fortune 500 companies are run by a woman. So my takeaway at this point is there's these remarkable achievements by all of these women. There's some statistics there that show a number of different things, but there is clearly still work to do in terms of bringing about gender equality.